Computer, generate me a fat chud. Happy Monday, everyone. Insomniacs Spider-Man 2, for as much as people lambast the story, generally conceded that the swinging was really good. Treyarch Spider-Man 2 is similarly praised for its swinging, and yet these two games could not be more different. Let me get something straight, however, which is that I am not going to sit here and tell you which one is better. Because as I think this video will showcase, this is apples and oranges, man. Instead, I want to look at the different goals a swinging system needs to achieve, how these two systems go about achieving those goals, and maybe we can learn some stuff along the way, I'm not sure. With that said, our first topic isn't about either of these two games specifically, but more broadly about what a Spider-Man swinging system needs to achieve, and the different external factors that influence how that swinging feels. I think perhaps the most important thing about swinging, and I know that this is obvious and is stupid, but it needs to make you feel like Spider-Man. Quantifying how much you feel like Spider-Man is difficult because it's an inherently subjective experience, hence the term feel. But I think we can find some ground rules for what a system needs to spiritually provide in order for the players to have the intended experience. First, and perhaps the easiest, is to make them look like Spider-Man. This is pretty easy to achieve. Just give me some red and blue tights, make the webs kinda look like webs, and we're good to go. But it's more about aesthetics than fidelity. Exemplified how, even being over 2 decades old, I can have a ton of fun with the old Spider-Man 2 swinging, but it's not all about aesthetics, and the other part is mindset. We need to make sure mechanics are in place to make the player think like Spider-Man, such as tricks, and further, giving us experience for using tricks means that we want people to be rewarded for using swinging as a means of expression, for having fun with swinging, and for, more or less, thinking like Spider-Man. Finally, and perhaps this is a bit more abstract, but I think New York is a huge part of the fantasy. The Big Apple is half the equation here. We want to coast above a sea of commuters, skip the Brooklyn traffic, whiz by people just chilling in their homes. Okay, so now that we have feeling like Spider-Man covered, let's also talk about what I'm going to call the traversal spectrum. This is applicable to plenty of game systems, especially as we continue to move further and further into games that achieve convincing realism. Essentially, on one side, we have control, and on the other, we have realism. The scale is what I'll attribute mechanics to. The more control we have with the mechanics, the worse it typically looks. And the better it looks, the less control we typically have. Now, this doesn't apply to all games, but personally, I think this applies to nearly every game I have ever played, at least to some degree. This is because control is generally a bit janky. I really think modern video game controllers are a fucking miracle, but let's not pretend you can get any kind of precision from this tiny thumbstick. By virtue of simply playing a video game, there are limitations. For example, jumping is almost always delegated to one button. In both Spider-Man 2s, you can charge that jump, but in real life, you don't need to wind up for a second. You can just jump at basically whatever height you're capable of. It's the same reason we have aim assist in shooters. You want to pick up the slack, remove some control from the player in order to offer a smoother experience. Dying Light implements slight magnetism to objects so that if you're running past something but are cutting it a bit too close, you don't get caught. Instead, the game skirts you like an inch over, and it results in a really smooth experience with the parkour. We'll see a similar system used in Insomniacs Swinging 2, dubbed Swing Assist, and we can even see that in the original Spider-Man 2. Audiences love realism in games, but it's only ever to an extent. Like, I love when games have a mechanic like a character's hair getting progressively longer over a period of time. Or I love when a game has realistic physics. But I don't want to have to monitor my character's bladder to make sure I urinate in the middle of a mission. In a Spider-Man context, I want to be able to generally control where my webs go. But I don't want to necessarily control the length of the web, the exact pixel of where it shoots, and any other millions of calculations the guy actually does on the fly. So I'm okay with shooting a line in a general direction that I dictate, and then guesstimating the distance of the web required and so on. This is all stuff I can get behind. However, there is one philosophy that partially drives these systems that I don't like, and that is player skill. Ultimately, no one wants to be bad at games, and developers don't want players to have a negative experience. Sure, being bad at a game can be a good motivator and can even be fun for people, but most people want to feel good at the game they play. And that's why these systems typically remove some control, because the less control a player has, the more control the developer has over the intended experience. In the Insomniac games, you genuinely have to try to look bad at it. If you literally just hold R2, you will look good. In the old Spider-Man 2, if you were bad at the game, you'll look like it. You can still look like a pro, but you need a certain competency with the systems to achieve that. And that's part of the game's progression. You start the game sucking ass, and by the end, you're moving as smooth as a real Spidey would. Funny enough, one of the biggest criticisms of Insomniac swinging is that you learn it in 10 minutes and then nothing changes ever.
No matter how much I enjoy this system, or how great it looks in evolution of web swinging videos, I hadn't touched this system in 2 years. But in 15 minutes, I swung with as much confidence, ability, and expressiveness as I did in 15 hours.
Okay, enough broad talk. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty.
I said right foot creep.
And talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the original Spider-Man 2. An obvious strength is the control that you have, especially when we consider that it offers a simplified and an advanced mode. Most of my critiques and praises, however, will be referring to the advanced mode. We get webs that shoot out based on the direction our stick is pointing, webs that stick to buildings, and there is a great sense of momentum. Web zips are here, and there are some admittedly basic tricks to incorporate into the movement. Wall running and loop-de-loops are here, and we can even swing from 2 webs at the same time. This can honestly result in some goofy moments, but it can also result in fantasy fulfillment. Sometimes I want to pretend I'm a more inexperienced Peter, who might, for the sake of safety, never let go of one web without already holding on to the other. This is something the newer games flat out can't provide. And it's something no other Spider-Man game has been able to replicate. Not even the game's direct sequel, Spider-Man 3, which, and I will die on this hill, is not that bad, guys. Come on, it's been long enough. So the weaknesses in this case can be that it's hard to master. I think the game has enough races and instances for you to hone your skills, and it's not exactly rocket appliances, but I do think this game was made during a time where games didn't always have the best tutorials for deeper systems. They kind of give you only what you need to get by, and then let you figure out the rest on your own. I know I'm about to get a million people saying it's not the game's fault that people have a skill issue, and I'm sorry, but it is sort of the game's responsibility to teach you how to get the most out of it. Like, Minecraft's biggest criticism is that you had to have the fucking wiki on the second monitor so that you could figure out how to craft things. When I first played Minecraft, I was 10 and spent 2 hours digging out a cave home, but I didn't know you could craft a pickaxe, so I did it with my hands. I only learned how to make a sword, and that wasn't exactly fucking helpful. Now, I'm not asking for every game to give you a pop-up every 20 seconds like, "Did you know that you can save your game?" Or have like yellow paint everywhere. But I think we can look at Ultimate Spider-Man to see how this could have been implemented better. In that game, a lot of the races ask you to pull off progressively harder feats, but they also serve as a movement tutorial. It's also funny that Ultimate Spider-Man does a better job of tutorializing finer movement, because Spider-Man 2 has by far the deepest movement of the Spider-Man games, and that includes Insomniac's games. Whether it's better can be debated, but the amount you can do in Treyarch's Spider-Man 2 is unmatched. A final point about the game needing to teach you more is that if a game doesn't, then it reflects poorly on the game itself. Web of Shadows was criticized heavily by critics who, many would agree, didn't understand the game well enough. But I could never blame them because the game doesn't do a great job of teaching you its mechanics. All it does is ask you to web strike like 50 times back to back, and then it kicks you into the deep end. Ultimately, wink, Spider-Man 2 is the perfect game for when you want to have full control over your character. You are not at the whims of what was animated or what moves were hard-coded into the game. You are only bound by physics and your own skill level. The most important part of this freedom, however, is expression. Swinging in different ways expresses different mindsets, different goals, and that is closely tied to freedom. The more freedom you have, the more expression you have, and thus the more fun you're likely to have. Now, a lot of games were like Spider-Man 2, deep systems that ultimately made up for a lack of fidelity. A lot of games didn't bother trying to be realistic because at the end of the day, it never could look realistic. So instead, they had to focus on mechanical depth. With this, freedom and depth gave way to, as mentioned, a bit of inherent jank. Unfortunately, if you did something stupid, you look stupid. This is a bit of a problem though when games are ultimately a medium through which the developer delivers an experience. Too much variance in an experience, or if a player's skill gets in the way of that experience, then we have a big problem on our hands. It's exactly why difficulty settings are present in basically every game. Easy mode isn't for people who don't want a challenge. It's for people who are new to games or aren't good enough to get past normal for whatever reason that might be. Nobody wants to fail, and unfortunately, when they do, they often blame the game. So what's the solution? Put more and more training wheels on the player until they can no longer fail unless intending to do so. This brings us to Insomniacs Spider-Man 2. In the first Spider-Man 2, you could hit the ground no problem. Now, you get a little boost to keep you from hitting the ground. Now webs stick to buildings, but only when it's convenient. The only time you can actually slam into the ground is when you're doing an air trick. Thus, slamming into the ground is not a natural part of the process. It's an intentional move you pull off like any other air trick. This is done so the player's ego is heightened, and we can see evidence of this purely from looking at any swinging video. Players end up being so convinced that they are good at the game that they're kind of quick to shit on somebody who's not playing it up to their standards. It's like two people are riding a bicycle with 18 training wheels, and one looks at the other and says, "Wow, check out this bozo, he doesn't know how to ride a bike." Is that a bad thing? Not really. I mean, the gamer's ego is embarrassing, I'll give you that, but it's not the game's fault. And the truth is, we want players to feel that way. You want a player to feel like they're on top of the world when playing your game, and to that extent, Insomniacs Swinging succeeds. The game never takes the training wheels off, but I won't act like the pre-packaged trick animations, the flow of swinging, the sense of momentum is just utterly fantastic. And it's the big leg up that it has over Treyarch Spider-Man 2. Insomniacs Swinging has the visual sauce. You look so fucking good out of the gate. It's crazy. And I think the animation work is top notch. Here's a fun thing you can do. Go into the accessibility settings and slow the game down to 50%. And just look at the finer details in the animations. Things as small as the web having a bit of a bounce to it is here, and I don't think that would be possible on older hardware. Couple this with a wider selection of suits, the drop-dead gorgeous fidelity, and it makes sense why people can't agree on which swinging is better. They offer completely different things and are both systems indicative of how gaming was at the time. Insomniacs Spider-Man games are releasing during a time where more and more, large corporations like Sony want games to move closer to imitating cinema, being an interactive movie, instead of being an independent medium capable of telling stories that no other medium could. It might seem on the surface like these are two games where you can just swing around, but the truth is that one game ditches the training wheels for true control, and the other holds your hand, only letting you control the animations, but always making you look like Spider-Man. And that's half the equation of feeling like Spider-Man. Now, I want to clarify something else here, which is the wingsuit. I think the wingsuit is a wise addition to the swinging. It allows for more varied traversal, it's a way for players to save themselves if they end up overshooting something, and it looks cool. Genuinely, no complaints. But I don't find myself using it that much because I want to swing, not fly. Also, I know the Insomniac games have a skills ceiling, and I know that there are people who can go real fast, but I don't factor that in too much because one, you can go plenty fast with the swinging alone, it's another one of the game's big strengths, and two, the people who go the fastest are usually just spamming air boosts and the wingsuit, and sure, if you find that fun, more power to you. But I'm trying to stay focused on the swinging portion of this conversation. To wrap up this discussion, I want to remind you that I really don't think there's much that can objectively quantify which system is better. Personally, I like Insomniac Swinging more, but that doesn't change Treyarch's strengths. I know that answer probably doesn't sit right with some of you, because as Spider-Man 2's reputation is in the bin, people are so hard-pressed to admit that it does anything good. Don't get me wrong, Spider-Man 2 is messy, but I'll always say that the swinging is pretty good, but I think we need to wait a bit longer to really have that discussion. Right now, we have to deal with the flat-out slander, like people saying Insomniac made all their women ugly. Like, yeah, okay, let's pretend Rio Morales isn't fine as hell, and that Black Cat wouldn't have me folding like a wet noodle. I'm staring at half the women in these games like, my mind's telling me no! You know what, as I'm realizing as a YouTuber, I should not be making any kind of R. Kelly references. I'm kind of cutting it a little close. Either way, trust me, in another 3 or 4 years, some YouTuber is gonna make a video titled either Spider-Man 2 7 years later or In Defense of Spider-Man 2. And then the whole conversation is gonna change just like it did with Watch Dogs 1, Watch Dogs 2, Arkham Knight, Assassin's Creed Unity, and so on. And people are gonna be like, guys, why did everybody shit on this game when it came out? And everyone's gonna be like, beats me. So with that said, let me know which game you like more and why. I'm sure you've noticed, but I got a better green screen and some lights because some of you commented about how bad it was in the first video, and honestly, I know I tried to cheap out on everything and it really showed. But since you guys like the green screen videos, I figured it was worth it to throw some proper cash into it. Hell, even in the first video, you can see the shitty pop filter that was too big for my microphone. So it's just held in place with my wife's scrunchie. And I was gonna upgrade some of that, but my package got lost by Amazon, so next week, I guess. Either way, it was proper shite, mate, I'll tell you. So, yeah, Thank you all so much for watching and supporting the channel, and I hope everyone, except the people who obsess over Steam charts, has an excellent week. I'll see you next Monday.